Milton, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and fill me in on what the imagination dilemma of your industry is. But first, I thought maybe if you could just introduce yourself, give a high level overview of all the many exciting things that you do and are a part of.
Hey, thank you. Well, it's great to be with you, Lydia, and to discuss these topics. They're really top of mind and top of list for, I think, myself and for most luxury brands. I am Milton Pedraza, CEO of the Luxury Institute. I'm also a private investor and an author now, but we'll talk about that later. Luxury Institute's been around for 21 years. We've served over 1,100 luxury goods and services brands in three capacities. We conduct research with the high net worth and the ultra high net worth client, and on behalf of brands and on behalf of our own account. So we do a lot of research with the wealthiest people on the planet. We have a network of those people who consent to allow us to conduct research. We also have a network of thousands of luxury executives and former luxury executives and consultants who are people who we bring in to staff our projects. So it's a very flexible and malleable sort of business model. With all the learning from the research and the consulting, we also do a lot of training for luxury sales forces. So that's essentially what we do at Luxury Institute.
Doing all of that, you must be at the very edge and pulse of everything that's changing, but also the fears and anxieties that people are having in all those realms. So I'm very curious, what do you see as the biggest imagination or some of the biggest imagination dilemmas of the luxury industry?
I think it really stems from the fact that we have many brands that have traversed the timelines of sometimes over 100 years, sometimes 200 years. For example, Hermes was founded in 1837. And some brands are great at reinventing themselves and transitioning to the lifestyles, to the, let's say, the environments that evolve and emerge around them. And other brands are very static. And in many cases, it's because they have always done things the same way and they're afraid to change. But I think they fear becoming unhinged because they don't understand the difference between a brand's DNA, its purpose, its values, its standards, and the products that continually need to be reinvented. And I think that's probably the biggest dilemma or the biggest issue. And I think the other issue is that there are a lot of pretenders in luxury, brands that call themselves luxury but are not. They don't have the luxury credentials. And so they're pretenders, they're products that are really more for aspirational consumers. So when economic hard times come, those brands tend to lose their mojo. They tend to sometimes expire. So there's a lot of calling luxury brands luxury when in fact they're just premium or really, let's say high-level mass brands. I think there's other dilemmas like what's going to happen with AI. What percent of the customer experience should be automated because these are rote tasks, and what percent of the experience should be that human bond, human connection oriented, relationship oriented type of element. So optimizing that rather than compromising it is another one of the dilemmas of the luxury industry.
I want to circle back to the DNA one. So the DNA one really reminds me of the identity facet of imagination in my book. And so you were saying that there's the DNA of the brand, which is separate from the products. And the imagination struggle that many are having in the luxury industry is that they don't know how to disconnect these two things and they don't know how to reinvent them together. Is that what you're saying? Could you expand?
Well, it's a little more, let's say, nuanced than that. So the products do represent the brand DNA. Obviously, right? The venues, the products, the people represent the essence, the Gestalt, as they say in German, right? The essence of something has many elements. And you need to know which ones you can adapt, others you need to maintain. For example, you take Hermes again. Hermes was created as a company that made harnesses and saddles in 1837. So they served mostly royalty, they served the military, and let's say other riders. Because of that, the craftspeople, the craftsmanship of the product, the materials of the product, the customization of the product to fit the anatomy of a horse and a rider to optimize that combination were essential. And so they revered the craftspeople. They revered the atelier, the workshop, and they have always maintained that. that essence, that DNA of the highest quality materials, the highest quality product made by the most expert craftspeople has always been at the center of that company. What they make with those today, handbags today, they do a collaboration with watches with Apple, has emerged and evolved in many different ways. But the essence, the identity of Hermes as that company that emanated with those values and those standards has never wavered, has never changed. Unlike other brands that decided, hey, we're going to do it cheaply in China, Romania, whatever. It's not that those products are not good quality, but they lose something from French made, Italian made. I mean, Italy right now is having a major problem that they have basically imported a lot of Chinese labor that allegedly is treated very poorly, paid very poorly to make luxury products in Italy. So it's made in Italy. Oops. But we forgot to tell you, these are the other sort of the asterisks that in many ways violate the essence of the brand.
So could you speak? So Hermes sounds like a really perfect example of a company that was able to transform and evolve with time and continue to offer relevant products. So you mentioned the Apple collaboration with the watches. Could you give an example of a brand, a luxury brand that has struggled or is struggling today to try and like marry those two, the DNA, whatever DNA that is, and the modern world today?
Okay, well, this morning there was a headline that LVMH had acquired a non-alcoholic champagne company. Now, for many years ago, the luxury industry identified that there was a wellness and health revolution emerging among the high net worth and the ultra high net worth. We're talking pre-pandemic. Concierge medicine was invented, spas. I mean, there's a whole movement there, diets, etc. That was easy to spot. And I think everyone was aware because, all the executives are wealthy people themselves across the entire gamut of the wines and spirits industry. And I even know pioneers in England who have created non-alcoholic drinks and non-alcoholic bars. So we know they exist, but for whatever reasons, and I think the reason is that you are afraid to lose what you already have, alcoholic wines and spirits, or to even talk about it, maybe the way that Coke could never have invented, Diet Coke until they got it through their minds that no, sugar was not an essential part of their product and they needed to innovate because consumers were moving in a different direction. At least there was a major segment of consumers that wanted sugar-free. And then there's been a lot of innovation, good and bad, in sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, some natural, some not, So there's been a lot of innovation in that simple product. The luxury, because most wines and spirits want to be premium or luxury, they don't want to be the cheapy kind, is a massive industry that could have, in their own, let's call them laboratories, R&D centers, created non-alcoholic beverages, wines, spirits, but they have not. And so LVMH is acquiring 30% of one, but the resources could have been put into not reinventing, but complementing the alcoholic segment into a low alcohol or maybe no alcohol set of segments to come out, reach out and meet the changes of consumers, young and old. Older consumers for, longevity reasons and health reasons are reducing their alcohol intake. Younger consumers, I know young, wealthy consumers who have never tasted an alcoholic drink, and they're a growing segment, at least a much more tempered approach. So there's an example where the industry itself could have reinvented, especially to serve high net worth and ultra high net worth consumers who were telling us years ago, before the pandemic, that, hey, I'm reducing my alcohol intake. They called it the move to quality, not quantity, but it was more than that. That was just a veneer for, there's so many studies, my doctor's recommending I reduce, my peers are consuming less. There's something there, and you need to not just react, but respond to it elegantly, effectively. And we haven't done that in the luxury industry. I think I could mention numerous examples. So I'm not going to single out any names, but the entire luxury wines and spirits, premium wines and spirits industry is late to the party.
That's such a great example. As somebody who also prefers zero proof, I can totally relate to this market growing, and I could see how there's a space for craftsmanship in this no alcohol space. And so it's basically like missing this kind of moment of this evolving, emerging, nuanced
Yes, yes,
market.
yes.
So then let's turn back to the AI example that you gave. That was one of the dilemmas. So could you unpack that a bit more? You said it was like AI personalization, but then there's like the human part is really important in luxury as well. So walk me through what the imagination challenges are. What are the dilemmas in this space?
Well, I think that partially, so I was watching a video from Salesforce, and they were basically saying, it was a Salesforce, their 2024 event a couple of weeks ago, and they were unpacking the fact that you can now program an agent using your own data, your own inputs, so that that agent will replace the call center people, the just about, let's just say bots that are now kind of really, they're very inefficient and ineffective. They're very impersonal.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
there's this, we thought that AI was going to be more like, okay, individual employees are going to take that input from the AI and they're going to be enhanced. But what Salesforce was saying effectively, and I think the guy from Stratechery really put it best, we're talking about multiple processes that are very complex that you can program AIs from the top down to essentially replace people. And there's not going to be any human involved in there because the humans will get in the way of these rote, high level and low level tasks that are going to serve the client better. And they are probably going to serve the client better because they're much more reasoning and much more adaptability and agility in these agents, AI agents, than ever before. Okay. And it's potentially a massive cost saving. It's also potentially a lot of high level and low level jobs lost, including coders. AI can code better than most coders. You need a few to prompt and check, et cetera, but it's mostly automated. And sort of the way
Hmm.
that factories went the way of automation, still need factory workers, but a
Hmm.
lot less. And so in the luxury industry, let's talk about the store and maybe even the call center. We've always been very keen on having an emotional connection, a human connection, on the theory that it builds the relationship. If Lydia, the client, can come back to Milton at the store, maybe even the call center, and or a team of people at the call center who know me well, who have the knowledge, the empathy, the data, we can build a long-term relationship that it's not just about product, it's not just about channel, it's about human beings. And so there's going to be a temptation on the part of many brands to automate because of cost savings, just like they have gone to, allegedly slave Chinese labor in Italy to make the handbags for $57 as opposed to what Hermes does, which is, pay an atelier, train and develop a craftsperson to build a handbag meticulously with the finest materials um, in days, several days, or a watchmaker, etc. So
Hmm.
going back to that frontline piece, you have to figure out, okay, what tasks, even in luxury, are done best by an agent, an artificial intelligence agent, because the client doesn't want to wait because it's friction free. And
Hmm.
what tasks do we need to continue to have? So I'll give you an example in the hotel industry. In the hotel industry, the luxury hotel industry, I would argue all of it, but in the luxury hotel industry, when human beings are there to greet me at the entrance, that makes a massive difference in how I perceive the experience and how I'm going to feel about the entire stay. To put the other bookend, you should also have that at the exit, but sometimes they don't. You're checked out already, you kind of walk out by yourself. I think that's a mistake because of the cementing of the relationship, and especially in a resort where the people matter so much. You're staying overnight. It's not a flyby like you go into a store for 20 minutes, you come out with a product, or maybe even an hour, but you come out with a product and you don't go back. You're staying, your entire life is going to be in that resort. So there's a lot of hotels that have auto check-in. You need to, in my opinion, figure out what does the technology do, and then what does that empower the human being to do maybe more and better so that you really build a bond, a relationship, a human connection at that resort, at that store with the client. Is it the bot that reaches out to the client, or is it the human being that reaches out to the client when there's a new product or a new uh, innovation or a sale, or hopefully there's no sales in luxury, but an event that you're inviting people to. So for example, we know from our research of 21 years in luxury that if I invite you to an event and I just send you a nice, beautiful invitation, the chances that you'll go are lowered. But if I, the store manager or the store associate who knows you, reaches out, says, Lydia, I'd love for you to come to this event. You're going to love this. The chances of you showing up go up dramatically. So that's the human/technology dilemma, which we need to optimize, not compromise.
This is fascinating because as you're saying this, this is making me think that it's about the whole journey, the customer journey, revisiting it, and then not being held by any kind of like past way of doing things and saying, great, let's optimize for emotional experience. If that means AI, we do it, but we're deliberate. And if that means human, we add more humans in because we need to make sure that that emotional journey across that user experience is maximized.
And there's also the situation where you need to be very flexible, adaptable, and agile with the relationship. Mm-hmm. You walk in and you say, Milton, I want that handbag delivered to my house, put it on my credit card, I got to go. And I go, oh, no, Lydia, or I act as if I want you to go through my entire, as they used to call it, sales ceremony. And I'm like, no, not right now, not today, not this time, right? So that's what a relationship is, right? You the same with personal relationships. Sometimes you use shortcuts, sometimes you have to ignore because you're busy working, whatever. You touch base later, whatever. But the point is that it's a highly flexible and adaptable continuum. And when you get into a flow state, meaning it's sort of a very, very seamless experience, you can go in and out of elements, you can go in and out of human connections over the lifetime of that relationship. And that's a beautiful thing to create. And that kind of agility, adaptability, and creativity is what luxury brands need. But very often they're so regimented that they can't really understand how human relationships flow and have their, ups and downs and ins and outs, but still you maintain the relationship tightly. And so I think that's another dilemma that really, because they're so regimented and everything seems like factories sometimes in stores and the way they train people, they think, oh, I have to script Milton to say, good morning, Lydia, how are you? And all these other silly, how do I overcome obstacles? You never overcome obstacles with wealthy people. They're just not cut out that way. You are not going to overcome her obstacles. If she doesn't want it, she doesn't want it. And if she wants it now. So there's all this kind of dogmas that really hound the luxury industry and that it needs to get over in a brand new world.
This has left me with a lot to think about in terms of how what you've said is also applicable outside of the luxury industry, because what you've talked about is basically the identity facet of imagination and the humanity facet of imagination. In essence, we need to be able to reimagine our identity in today's world by holding on to who we are, but reimagine for the new world. But then also leaning into the humanity or the humanness of the people that we're interacting with, our customers, the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I think that this is very applicable in other industries as well. But I'd like to now turn to you. So we talked about the imagination dilemma of the luxury industry, but what are some of the imagination dilemmas that you've personally faced where you've seen something change? Like you gave an example of how in the alcohol industry, the market is showing strong signals that it's leaning towards non-alcoholic. Like, what are the moments where you've seen some things which you just couldn't imagine? How do you overcome it? How do you grapple with it? How do you deal with it?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges for Luxury Institute has been that we have so many copycats, and that's true for brands too, right? And when it comes to intellectual property or ideas, people can take them and steal them and never give you an attribution. You're going to have the same problem, Lydia, right? So for us, we started Luxury Institute with two objectives. We wanted to give a voice to the high net worth and ultra high net worth clients because they had no voice. It was basically, you'll take it the way I give it to you. And it was basically, I am the brand, I am the sun, and you, consumers, I don't care how rich you are the planets. And we wanted to flip that model where the consumer is the sun and the brands are the planets. And some of them are just asteroids because they're not good enough. Okay. And so we also wanted to go from this transactional approach that luxury had to a relationship oriented approach. And we have done the homework over the years with neuroscientists, with performance science, with emotional intelligence. As an institute, we were research based. But what we found was people would take our ideas and run with them, not having done any of the research. And so we were at a disadvantage. Almost the way that Xerox PARC, remember how Steve Jobs stole all the ideas and all the innovations of Xerox PARC, and he took them and he did something with them. So our dilemma was, okay, we have to do something with them. So we started out as research, and then we began to do training because we realized that it's not enough to say what the consumer wants. You have to help brands execute. And not only execute, but we decided that we needed to have, most consultants don't really stick around to measure whether the sales went up 20%, 30%, 40%. They don't do, 6 months before, 6 months after. So we had to innovate a whole new process that would allow us to say, for the client to say, yes, sales went up by 20% because of what we did with Luxury Institute. So that's the other thing. Consultants always came, left, did not measure, did not execute. And that was another dilemma. The biggest dilemma we've had is that, like many brands, others will copy. I mean, there's a proliferation of luxury experts. So how do we differentiate ourselves today? Well, we started with surveys. We realized everybody went to surveys. We decided, then 2008 came and budgets were cut. We had to reinvent ourselves into training. Then 2000, we had the COVID. And, a lot of budgets were cut in total, but you couldn't train people in stores. I think what we were able to settle into that really has been a strategic advantage for us is we had a network. We realized we had a network of very wealthy people. And NASA came to us and said, can you recruit 15 multi-billionaires for us and interview them so that we can design the space station experience? And to be honest, we had never done that before, but we knew people. And so we realized that we have this network that was a resource that other people didn't have because NASA said that nobody else could do it. And so we delivered for NASA, and then we developed this, not panel, but this network, made it richer, made it more, let's say, trustworthy, improved the experience of how you actually interview wealthy people. And now we develop a niche where we have this vast network of over 400 or 500 families, thousands of individuals, friends of friends of friends, colleagues of colleagues of colleagues who consent, but also often they're very eager to share insights so that we can serve our clients. And so we had to reinvent ourselves into a space where we knew that most other people cannot go. Most other, let's say, researchers are still doing surveys, are still doing focus groups, or even the one-to-one interviews are with people who are not billionaires, are not centimillionaires. And so we were able to develop that niche. It has its limits in scope, in size, but it's very robust in that very few can do it. So what's my point? You have to find and reinvent yourself. We've done that every 5 years. And you have to find spaces that others are not or are afraid to go into or are not able to go into. And by the way, you just have to know the size, the limit of that space, because there's not an infinite number of uber wealthy people. And there's not an infinite number of brands that want to serve the uber wealthy. But if you can dominate your space, then you're going to be very well off. So that's one way that we have reinvented ourselves. But we've always been research-based, speaking to your DNA. We've always wanted to, so we studied performance science. When we needed to teach emotional intelligence to salespeople, we reinvented our definition for luxury of emotional intelligence. We distilled Daniel Goleman's, almost 20 core competencies, and Yale University and all the other emotional intelligence think tanks that had many core competencies. And we realized that Salespeople could not learn that. Whether you were a wealth advisor, a real estate advisor, or a retail store salesperson, you could not keep count, take into account, master all of that. So we distilled it into 5 elements that you
What are
could
the 5 elements?
well, the first one is that you need to have expertise, right, in your domain. And you need to
Mm-hmm.
have expertise in yourself and in people.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is that you need empathy. You need to be able to observe what is being said, what is not being said, what is being done, what is not being done by the client. You also need to ask relevant questions. And then you need to listen very, 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 very carefully. And your intent to listen has to be to add value, to help, not to sell. The next one is trustworthiness. How do I communicate to you, my client, the person in front of me, verbally and non-verbally, that I am here to protect, enhance, and promote your best interests before I serve them? I want to exchange value, but you get the value first. The next one is kindness, generosity. We're a little surprised, but a lot of wealthy people, when we interviewed, said, I love when people are kind to me, which is highly underestimated by the luxury industry. Still is, in my opinion. So acts of kindness, but it's not a discount. It's not a free product. It's taking care of me, nurturing me as a human being. And then the last one is creativity. Why? Because when you're creative, you can take expertise, empathy, you can take trustworthiness, you can take generosity, and you can create an extraordinary experience. It doesn't have to be in an opulent space. That's why, you see a lot of luxury brands creating bigger stores. And now they're going to have to shrink them down a little bit, because what matters, yeah, great venue, great products. Those are table stakes. It's the human connection. And so if you can bring those elements to bear in different ways, because the next time I interact with Lydia, my client, is going to be different. So my expertise is required is going to be different. The empathy that I bring is going to be different. The trustworthiness that I manifest is going to be different. The kindness that I manifest surely should be different. And my creativity drives all of that. And so we're teaching humans not to be robots, like the training programs that are still here today. Say this, do that, do this at this time, and do it this way. Into bring your humanity with you, manifest those elements, master them, and then use your creativity to unleash a beautiful experience and create joy in front of that human being. And by the way, you're going to feel all the health benefits and the joy yourself.
You know what's ironic is that we are training humans to be kind of robotic, as you've given an example, and yet we're training AI to be more human.
Correct.
And
We literally have written that statement but what we want is an optimization of that, right? Yes, Lydia, you're absolutely right. And we literally have that in what that we're training AI to be emotionally intelligent. I'm not sure it's ever going to get to that because it is artificial. And authenticity and genuineness, like the real thing, can never be truly replicated. The real human, because humanity is highly imperfect. There's a song by Hall & Oates that says, "Don't mess with imperfection." That imperfection is what makes us human, but it's also what makes beautiful things happen, right?
You know, what you're saying, those attributes and the way that you described them about like bringing out the human, it reminded me of my high school etiquette books. And they were teaching kind of what you're talking about, like the generosity, the kindness, like how to be a nice human. And perhaps this kind of old age etiquette needs some dusting and brought back to the present, as you have described. And on that note, I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about your new book, because I know that you've reinvented yourself so many times, and you've got all of these lessons that you've learned, and you just described the 5 elements. What does your book now offer?
So it's interesting. So our book came from a relationship with my co-author, Erica Wertheim Zohar, who is a phenomenal human being, super sharp, super smart, and a philanthropist, an extreme philanthropist. She doesn't like when I say that, but she is. Her family has given away, contributed hundreds of millions of dollars to education, primarily medicine. And so they're extreme. So they live the values. The other piece is that we realized, speaking of having to reinvent yourself, that the 5 elements that we had We
Mhm.
were applying them only to luxury. And that's not good enough to change the world. And we know that they work, as you say, in all other companies. And so we had to redefine it along with Lior and Katie Sousa. Lior is Erica's husband, and Katie is my associate. We decided, okay, what will it be? And they said, I didn't come up with it, high trust. And then high trust worth became the theme, as
Mhm.
you could almost say that high trust worth leads to high net worth. And we
Mhm.
realized that wealthy people are wonderful laboratory and luxury brands for studying trust, because these usually are high value, highly considered, high risk sometimes, like a jet or a yacht products that you buy. They're very expensive, very high value. And then you have luxury brands that are not just trying to do a transaction if they're any good, they're trying to build relationships. So it's a perfect
Mhm.
laboratory and incubator for studying high trust, knowing that we could manifest that everywhere in every company, a small business, everywhere, even at a
Mhm.
McDonald's.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we took the elements, the expertise, we kept that. We kept the empathy, we kept the kindness and the creativity,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
we added authenticity because we know that being authentic, genuine, original matters tremendously. And we elevated all those into what consumers told us generates trust. So these generate
Mhm.
trustworthiness. Think about it, right? When you go to a doctor, you want them to be an expert, you want them to be empathic, you want them to be kind, you want them to be creative with your solution.
Mhm. Mhm.
But you also want this genuine person who, if we define it as someone who lives, their words and actions align with their stated values. Hopefully,
Mhm.
good intentions, right? Their intent and what they do are clear and they're
Mhm.
good. And so that's how we created this book. But we had to go back and study the history of trust, many case studies of trust, because we are researchers after all. So we studied Paul Zak and his studies on oxytocin. In fact, Paul just endorsed our book because we sent him the
Mhm.
manuscript. He's one of our heroes. How does the chemical
Mhm.
oxytocin, the love chemical, the trust chemical, how does that get triggered, through trust? By
Mhm.
word, trustworthy, kinds of acts and behaviors and
Mhm.
perceptions. We studied Robert Axelrod, who wrote The Evolution of Cooperation many, many years ago, and how tit for
Mhm.
tat works. So that's game theory. We studied another guy, Robert Novak, who also studied how kinship and relationships are built, how you're likely to trust someone in your village than you are someone, very, very far away. Now,
Mhm.
technology has shattered some of that, right? You and I have never
Mhm.
met in person, but we have created a very trustworthy relationship. You don't live in my village. So we have to adapt it. So we talked about digital trust, and then you see all the
Mhm.
AI that's occurring with, fake deep fakes and, fake this guy and fake Drake and, and some of
Mhm.
the people, some of the celebrities are licensing their voice, right, to Meta. So it's a mess. It's a good mess, but in the entire mess and the entire history of humanity, whether it's with corporations, with individuals, with romantic, business, trust is at the core. And I'll finish by saying one more thing, that this was what Stephen Covey, whom we respect very much, wrote the Seven Habits book and wrote a book on trust. So we've researched everyone who studied or researched trust. He said, when you meet someone, subconsciously in your brain, the question that really pops up is, do I trust this person? The next question after you engage with them and you decide that you are going to trust them because you've seen enough signals that they are trustworthy, at least to start,
Mhm.
is how do I earn their trust? So trust is in every single interaction repeatedly. You may trust someone you love, but they're doing something that seems off center, right? And so
Mhm.
your trust questions get triggered again. And so we realize that trust is so foundational, and having high trust worth in a world that is highly untrustworthy matters so much for success, for survival and thrival, that we decided to write a book that is a manual. We think it's a bit of a textbook. I'm about to teach it at Duke University in a couple of weeks. This will have aired afterwards, but I'll let you know how it goes. But that's the idea. How do we put our ding in the universe? We're not going to do it with the iPhone. We're going to do it with high trust work. And that's the essence of what we're trying to do.
That's so amazing. Thank you for unpacking that. It reminds me of how attention is the most important currency right now, but hearing you talk, I really feel that trust comes right up there. Attention, time, and trust, the most important currencies that we have today. And so, yeah, no, thank you so much for taking the time to explain all of this and give us some insight into what are the imagination dilemmas of the luxury industry.
Thank you. Appreciate it.